Hi everyone, I'm Cara Thompson, a dataviz consultant based in Edinburgh, and there are two things that I would describe as being my happy place. One is creativity within constraints, and two is slightly mad timing challenges for talks. So over the course of the next 10 minutes, we're going to take a graph and improve it in 10 different ways that show us how we can apply accessibility principles to make things look on brand, intuitive, and creative for our end user. So here we go. What's the plan? The plan is that the RSS, the Royal Statistical Society, is hosting the next season of the Great British Bake Off, and Mary Berry might be back. Now, none of this is true, but you've heard it here first. And you have been tasked with answering the question, how much chocolate should we buy in? Now, if you're interested in statistics, which you probably are because you're here, and if you like cake, which is also pretty likely, then you might be thinking, brilliant, this is the task for which I was born. But if I tell you that you can only show me one graph, that it needs to look like RSS, that it needs to be intuitive, that it needs to answer the key question, and that it needs to be accessible, then your feelings on the matter may start to shift a little bit. But fear not, that's why we're here. So let's make a graph. I'm going to be using data from the Bake Off package developed by Alison Hill, and we're going to be counting how many bakes included the word chocolate, raspberry, and orange across each of the series. And we're also going to be looking to see if there is any kind of Mary Berry effect in the data. So you can take all of these pieces of information and you can make this. And it kind of does contain everything that you need, but I think if you were to show this to the stakeholders, they might have a few words to say. So let's see what we can do to make it better. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to join the dots together within each colour to just emphasise the continuity and make the dots bigger so we can see the shapes. You've also then probably heard somewhere that it's not a great idea to only encode meaning through colour. So we're going to change around how we use the shapes and do this instead. So we've got shapes assigned to each of the different types of ingredients. And then we've created a common zone for the Mary Berry years, a little bit easier to read than the previous iteration. We should also give it some helpful text. So again, try to use titles that are declarative, so that tell the story. So chocolate has remained the most commonly used ingredient, despite being overtaken by orange in Series 8. We've added a subtitle around the Mary Berry effect, and we've got the number of bakes, number of the series that it was in, and we've helpfully realigned the series numbers with what they should be rather than ending up with series 2.5, which is not very useful to anyone. So we've got all this sorted, and it's kind of functional, but I think we can do a lot better than this. So let's give that a go. The first thing I'm going to encourage us to do is to choose intuitive colours. So here we've got photos of the different things and the person that we're depicting. And from this, we can plug it into any kind of colour picker tool and extract, for example, the colour of Mary Berry's cardigan. So once we've done that, we've got the colour palette here. I should say all of the resources that I'm talking about are linked on the talk page of my website, so you can go and have a look at that and explore them in your own time. So we've got our intuitive colour palette here, which should help us tell the story. Now, you're unlikely to be building graphs about cakes and about raspberries and chocolate and oranges, but do have a think about how you could use this. So in your own context, for example, which group or which variable gets the most energetic colour, or what should be seen to be fading over time, or who gets the positive colour, what gets the negative colour. Just have a think about any kind of intuitive associations that people have with the colours that you're using. And really importantly, please make sure you're always using the same colour to depict the same thing throughout a report if you're using it multiple times. So once we've got our colour palette, we need to check that it's colourblind friendly. So there are a bunch of tools that you can use to do that. This is the one that I use a lot when I'm building colour palettes for my clients. So we've got viz4.net/palettes, and what this does is it tells you both whether the palette is colourblind safe, and it also allows you to simulate what it looks like. So it tells us that it's colourblind safe, but I think to me the brown and the red still are pretty close together, so we're going to try and tweak that. Red is actually quite difficult to work with a lot of the time, so there are a few things that we need to do to make sure that that works for us. So we can tweak it. You can also use this palette, this tool, to expand the number of colours that you've got and see how it works. So if you wanted to create a map of the UK where people were, were they more interested in orange cakes or in chocolate cakes, and you needed it to spread a bit like this, you would quickly run into difficulty. So this tool allows you to expand the number of colours that you've got, and also to tweak your colours until you get something that you're happy with that you can continue using. So having done that, here's the before and here's the after. And you can see that we've got a colour that the only colour that's really changed is the raspberry colour, but the palette is already a lot easier to make sense of very, very quickly, which is good. So we've done that. The third thing that we need to do, we were told it needed to look on brand for RSS, so we're going to blend in a little bit of the brand colour. That's harder to say than I thought. There are two things that this achieves, or three, but we'll come back to the third one in a minute. The two main things that it achieves for now, it means that the colours don't jar as much with each other, and it also means that they look quite nice next to your brand colour. So this is the way to get around the issue. If you've got really good dataviz design guides or brand guidelines, and you just don't have a colour that you think is appropriate for the thing that you're depicting, try to blend in a bit of your main colour into a colour that you think is more semantically appropriate for the stuff that you're talking about in your graphs. So let's give that a go. This is Monochroma, which is an R package that I wrote, but I also turned it into a Shiny app. And what you can see I'm doing here is I've got the brown colour, the chocolate colour, and I'm blending in a little bit of the RSS blue that I took from their website. And that gives me a brown that's a little bit blue, that blends in a little bit nicer next to it. And if we apply this to all of our colours, here's the before, here's the after. It's subtle, but the colours work a little bit better together, and they also work quite well with the tealy blue that we have sitting behind them here for illustration. So I think, good, job done. This is great, but we're not there yet, actually. There's more that we need to do for our colours. A lot of people who are neurodivergent find that working with really stark colours can be very overwhelming, and so there's a preference there for using slightly muted and pastel tones. So you could think, oh no, this is another thing that I need to do for my graphs, but actually we've already done a lot of this. If you look at the before, we blended in the brand colour, and here's the after. You can see that the after is toned down a little bit compared to the before. So actually, in blending in the brand colour, we've already achieved this, which is always a good thing. Let's see what this actually looks like now in the context of our graph. So here was the before, here's the after with the more intuitive colours and the palettes that we've just tweaked in various ways, and I think we can all agree that it looks a lot nicer, and it's also a lot easier to extract the story at a glance. We're not quite there with the colours, so some of you will have spotted that the colour we've used for orange here is quite light compared to its background. And the web accessibility guidelines talk about making sure that we've got a good contrast ratio between the foreground and the background. So that means that things that are important in the graph need to be dark enough compared to the background or light enough compared to a dark background to stand out. But if we've got more than a handful of colours, it's actually impossible to achieve a palette which has colours that are both distinct from each other and colours that stand out enough from their background. So we can check this with the colour contrast checker. And as we can see here, so this is our colour that we used for the orange, and we can see that it's sitting at 2.15. The value that we're looking for is 3. So this is bad news for us. But there's a relatively easy fix that we can use, which is to simply apply a dark contour to the important graphical elements. So again, this is, it's a slight tweak to the graph. I think it does what it needs to do. There's never going to be a perfect solution, but I think this is as good as we can get to making sure we've got colours that are both distinct from each other and also that stand out enough from the background. Now, I said 10 minutes and we are nearly there. The rest of it takes a lot less time. So the first thing we're going to do in terms of our text is improve the text hierarchy. This is about reducing the cognitive load around our graphs and helping people know which is the most important piece of text to read and what they need to read next, rather than just being confronted with a wall of text. So here's the before, here's the after, where I've increased the size of the title. I've also increased the size of the subtitle a little bit compared to the rest of the text, and you can see that it's a little bit less overwhelming to look at already because of this difference. The next thing we want to do is add in a bit of personality and readability. You want to avoid fonts that are too wide, too squished, too distracting, or too boring. And you also want to look out for a few things. So this font here that I've used is Noto Sans, which is the one that is on the RSS website, and it illustrates things quite nicely. So you want the letters C, E, and O to be distinct from each other. You want I, 1, and L to look different. You ideally don't want perfect symmetry between Q, P, and B and D, and you want your numbers to be nicely lined up as well. So it does a decent job of most of these things. If you want to look into this more, there are a bunch of fonts that have been developed specifically to help with readability that you can go and read about as well. So here's the before and here's the after, bringing in the RSS font. Looks a little bit friendlier, it's a little bit more on brand, so we're on the right track. We're then going to optimize the text colors, and here all I've done is I've taken the RSS blue, I've made it darker to go for a title color, and then I've gone lighter a little bit from that to make the rest of the text. And you can see that this just emphasizes the text hierarchy a little bit further. We're then going to give everything some space to breathe. So that's space to breathe around the graph and also space to breathe in terms of the line height. And that's particularly important for people with dyslexia. Just making sure that the text isn't just all squished together really, really helps. And it's also a lot nicer for us to look at. So we've got that. And if you'll allow me just one last point, the last thing to do is to add a background to the graph. Now this does several things. One thing that I find it is really helpful for is if you need to align things within a document. So if you've got a background around your plot, you don't need to worry about where the text outside the graph lines up with the text inside the graph, because everything just needs to line up with the box that the graph is. It also helps just encapsulate it nicely visually, so you're only looking at one thing rather than feeling like you've got to look at a whole report. It just sits nicely as a distinct element. And the last thing it does is it reduces any kind of harsh contrast that you can get between dark text and a white background, which again is helpful to our neurodivergent users. So there we go. We've gone from something that looked like this, which was perfectly functional but not that great, to something that looks like this, which is a lot nicer. And now it's over to you. You can find all the resources from this on the talks page of my website, and I look forward to seeing what you do with it. Thank you.